Now, Carol Vorderman's weekly show on BBC Radio Wales is to be axed after the presenter broke BBC guidelines with anti-Tory posts on social media. The BBC recently published new, stricter social media rules for stars and staff. Vorderman says she was not prepared to lose her voice on social media and claimed managers had decided she should leave.
But with Match of the Day host Gary Lineker returning to screens after publishing his own political social media posts, is this yet more hypocrisy from the BBC? Joining us to discuss this is the author of Can We Trust the BBC, Robin Aitken. Thanks for coming on board, Robin. I think the BBC has got itself in a real mess over this social media situation. It does seem to be mixed messages. Many people are concluding that Carol Vorderman, I mean, whether or not she's been sacked seems to be a moot point. She's declared herself that she's definitely broken the new social media rules. She said it wasn't in her contract, and she's decided she wants her voice, so she cannot carry on at the BBC. Perhaps that's feelings mutual, and the BBC have told her on your bike anyway. The point is, a lot of us are looking at what she's tweeted and thinking, well, what's the difference between what she's been tweeting and what Gary Lineker appears to still be allowed to tweet? Mixed messages, confusing. I know a lot of BBC staff are pretty angry about this situation. Your thoughts?
Well, you're right, there are mixed messages, but I suppose the reality of the situation is the comparative value to the BBC, as the BBC would see it, of Carol Vorderman with her programme on Radio Wales and Gary Lineker on Match of the Day. The point is, not to be naive about it, that the BBC doesn't want to lose Lineker and perhaps doesn't care too much about losing Carol Vorderman because she's a much lesser star and, you know, it's only a regional programme. So I think probably you're right, there is a degree of hypocrisy, but at least in this instance, it does send a message that the BBC is starting to apply those new guidelines more rigorously, perhaps. And it'll be interesting to see actually whether Lineker continues with his postings in the same tone as he has before. What I would say about this, Kevin, is I think that both Lineker and Vorderman and others in the BBC who take to Twitter, X as we call it now, I suppose, those people are actually damaging the BBC. They don't seem to understand that the BBC, if its core purpose of being an impartial news service is compromised, then that damages the BBC itself. That's the point.
Yeah.
You know, Vorderman and Lineker self-righteously proclaim they want their voice, they're going to have their say, they're going to make their views known on issues of the day, etc., etc., etc. It's all very noble sounding and self-righteous. But actually what they're doing is damaging the BBC. And they seem to pay no attention whatsoever to that. I mean, the BBC is desperately trying to hold the line. You know, it knows it has no friends in this current government, and it's worried about the future, about the licence fee and so on and so forth. It needs actually to curry favour with politicians. That's the truth of it. And people like Vorderman and Lineker don't make that job any easier.
And it's interesting as well that, you know, the BBC once internationally respected with the World Service as being a bastion, really, of very good broadcasting. I think in many respects has been singled out during the Gazan war for some of its coverage. Initially, we had the reports of the missile attack on the hospital, which was later clearly done by terrorists, not done by Israel, but the BBC rushing perhaps too quickly to suggest that Israel were responsible for that. I would also suggest that in their editorial, they're failing to cover certain stories, failing to cover stories in print newspapers, for example, connecting groups behind the pro-Palestine marches to Hamas. And the latest thing, of course, is that the BBC used in one of their big news bulletins footage by a man who has become a meme on the internet for allegedly being a Palestinian actor. Are they getting this wrong when it comes to the coverage of what's going on in Gaza?
Well, of course they are. I mean, the truth is that the BBC has a bad reputation amongst Jewish listeners and viewers. And you probably know this, Alex, but I don't know if the viewers will know this. But nearly 20 years ago now, the BBC commissioned a report by someone called Malcolm Balen, because there had been so many complaints about the perceived anti-Israel bias, anti-Jewish bias, if you like, on the BBC. And they commissioned a report, and that report has never been seen by any of us.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
they carried out this report, and they buried it away in the vaults at New Broadcasting House.
I think we can work out what that report probably concluded, if you know what I mean.
Exactly.
Now, your excellent book back in 2007, Can We Trust the BBC? In a little while, I'm going to ask you, can we trust the BBC? That was an early warning shot to a debate that's still going on now. The BBC actually admitted that during Brexit it was biased against Remain. Against Brexit. So this problem still goes on. What's your take, Robin, though, on the current raging storm about the fact that the BBC still refuses to call the terrorist organisation Hamas terrorists? No wonder Jewish people feel that the BBC is prejudiced against them.
Well, of course. I mean, you make what is actually, Kevin, it's an obvious point. The point is that language matters in these matters. And if you cannot clearly call what happened when Hamas swarmed over the border to the kids at the festival and then the Jews who were living in the kibbutz, if you can't call that terrorism, what does that say about your perception of the situation? It can only be that you are refusing to use an accurate term in the belief that, were you to do so, you would be offending part of the audience potentially. So it's this idea that, oh well, we can't call them terrorists because that will offend our Arab audiences. It might offend people who are Palestinian supporters. But really, that's an intense act of verbal cowardice, in my view. The people who support Palestine, many of them with very good intentions, I'm sure, should be reminded that the people who purport to represent the people of Palestine have committed utterly
mass atrocities.
horrific acts.
Totally agree, Robin. We've run out of time, but thank you so much. Good to talk to you.